When Amina Mbil, a young law graduate from Nairobi, got engaged to Kofi Nkrumah, one of Ghana's rising political stars, the whole continent couldn't stop talking about it. Their engagement looked like something out of a fairy tale. Cameras flashed, reporters cheered, and the event was broadcast live across Africa. People called it the perfect love story, beauty and power coming together. Amina smiled for the cameras, her diamond ring sparkling under the lights, but inside, her heart felt uneasy. Every smile felt rehearsed, every hug felt staged. Why were there cameramen at a proposal? Why did it feel less like love and more like a campaign? That night, as she looked at her engagement ring, she wondered if Kofi saw her as his partner or just another piece of his public image. The applause and cheers still rang in her ears, but all she could think about was how carefully every detail had been planned, the dress, the words, even the background music. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't real. While the world celebrated their perfect union, Amina quietly felt like she was stepping into something far bigger than marriage. She didn't know it yet, but that glittering night would be the start of a story that would shake nations, a story of power, betrayal, and courage. And it all began with one question in her heart: was this love, or just politics in disguise? After the grand wedding that everyone called the event of the year, Amina Mbil thought life might finally slow down. But it didn't. The honeymoon ended before it began. Her new home wasn't filled with love and laughter like she had imagined, it was filled with meetings, schedules, and cameras. Every morning, someone from Kofi's team would hand her a list of things to do, what to wear, what to post, what to say in public. Her wardrobe was no longer hers, it belonged to the campaign. The dresses were chosen to match Kofi's speeches. The jewelry was picked to look respectable but not flashy. Even her smiles were rehearsed in front of mirrors before events. At first, she tried to convince herself this was just how political life worked. Maybe love had to wait until after the election. But days turned into weeks, and the space between them grew colder. Kofi was always on the phone, always surrounded by his advisors. When Amina finally found a quiet moment to talk about something close to her heart, her dream to start a program for rural girls' education, he barely looked up from his laptop. "That's not our priority right now, darling," he said smoothly, the way politicians do. "The polls come first." Those words stung more than he knew. Amina began to see that she wasn't really a wife in Kofi's world. She was a prop, a symbol of grace and stability that helped his image. When they appeared together in public, everything was scripted. If she spoke too passionately or off-topic, one of his aides would gently pull her aside later and say, "Madam, next time, let's keep it simple." She started feeling like a doll dressed up for display, her real thoughts hidden behind makeup and smiles. At dinners, when journalists asked her questions about marriage or politics, Kofi would answer for her. He'd squeeze her hand under the table, a signal to smile and stay quiet. And she did, because every time she tried to speak up, it turned into an argument later. "You don't understand how politics works," he would say. "You're young, you'll learn." But deep down, she understood perfectly, she just didn't want to accept it. Behind the glamorous photos and cheerful interviews, Amina felt trapped. Nights were the hardest. The mansion was beautiful but silent, and Kofi's side of the bed was often empty as he stayed out late at meetings. She'd sit by the window, staring at the city lights, wondering if anyone could see how lonely she was. The girl who once dreamed of justice and change was now living in a golden cage. Still, she held on to one small hope, that maybe love would find its way back to them. But as the campaign grew louder and Kofi's world became more about power than people, Amina realized something painful: she had married a man who loved victory more than he could ever love her. As Kofi's campaign grew stronger, the world around Amina began to change. Their faces were everywhere, on billboards, newspapers, and TV screens. The people called them Africa's golden couple, the perfect mix of power and grace. But behind all the smiles and photo shoots, something darker was spreading through the whispers of powerful men and women. He only married her for votes, she overheard one night at a dinner party. Her clean image helps him look honest. The words cut deep, but what hurt more was that no one denied it. They laughed and toasted as if it were a clever political move, not a betrayal of love. At first, Amina tried to ignore the rumors. She told herself people were just jealous, that they wanted to tear down something beautiful. But soon, the whispers became louder, closer, and harder to ignore. In the corridors of government buildings and the grand halls of their mansion, she began catching fragments of conversations she wasn't meant to hear. Once the election is over, one aide said quietly to another, he won't need her anymore. She's done her part. Amina froze in place, pretending not to have heard. Her heart pounded so loudly she was afraid someone might notice. Everywhere she turned, there were eyes watching her, aides, photographers, bodyguards. Her every move seemed to feed the machine that Kofi had built. The same people who called her Madam with polite smiles would lower their voices the moment she passed. It became clear to her that in this grand game of politics, she was not a partner but a prop, one more carefully placed piece on the board. But Amina wasn't the type to crumble quietly. Late at night, when the house was silent and Kofi was buried in his strategy meetings, Amina would sit by her dressing table, staring into the mirror. The reflection looking back at her was still beautiful, but her eyes had changed, sharper, steadier, colder. The sadness that once filled them was slowly turning into something else, resolve. She began to see every lie, every fake smile, as a lesson. If they thought she was just a decoration, they were wrong. She was watching, learning, remembering. One morning, she walked into a meeting unannounced. The sudden silence in the room told her she had been the topic. Kofi's campaign manager quickly shuffled some papers, pretending nothing was wrong. Kofi smiled his politician's smile, but she noticed how his eyes darted nervously. That's when she knew, the whispers were true. They had planned this image from the beginning, and she had been the centerpiece. Her heart ached, but her mind started to plan. She would not let them destroy her dignity or use her name for corruption. She didn't raise her voice or confront them right away. Instead, she began to play her own game, quietly, cleverly, patiently. Everyone thought Amina Mbil was the soft-spoken wife. They had no idea she was becoming something far stronger, a woman preparing for a storm. It was a quiet night in the mansion, the kind of silence that feels heavy, as if the walls themselves are holding secrets. Amina couldn't sleep. Kofi had told her he'd be working late with his campaign team, but something about his tone had felt off. She decided to walk down to the study to grab a book, hoping it would calm her restless thoughts. As she moved through the hallway, she noticed a faint light spilling from the slightly open door of Kofi's private office. Voices drifted out, low, tense, serious. She paused, her hand hovering near the doorframe. She recognized Kofi's voice first. "Once the election is done, we'll begin the process quietly," he said. "We'll make it look like mutual consent." Amina's breath caught in her throat. She pressed closer, trying not to make a sound. His campaign manager replied in a calm tone, "And the fund for her? The amount is ready." It should be enough to keep her silent. They both laughed lightly, the kind of laugh that makes your stomach twist. Amina's body froze. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. For a moment, she thought she must have misheard. But as she listened, the truth became undeniable. Her husband was planning to discard her like a prop that had served its purpose. Her fingers trembled as she touched her wedding ring. The diamond that once symbolized love now felt like a shackle. She stepped back slowly, afraid they'd hear the breaking sound inside her chest. Every word from that room echoed in her mind: separation, silence, compensation. They had written her out of the story before it even ended. Amina walked back to her room on unsteady feet, closing the door behind her as quietly as possible. For a long time, she just sat there, staring into the darkness. Images from their engagement, their wedding, and all the public smiles flashed through her mind like cruel jokes. The man she had defended, loved, and trusted had been planning her betrayal all along. The pain was sharp, but it didn't crush her. It woke her up. By dawn, her tears had dried. She looked at herself in the mirror, eyes swollen, heart shattered, but spirit alive. Something inside her had shifted. The soft, obedient woman Kofi thought he controlled was gone. In her place stood someone new, calm, calculating, and quietly burning with purpose. She wasn't going to cry in silence or beg for mercy. She would wait, watch, and make her move when the time was right. That night had broken her, but it also lit a fire she didn't know she had. Kofi thought he was untouchable, that power made him invincible. But Amina had learned something powerful too: when a woman has nothing left to lose, she becomes unstoppable. And from that moment on, she vowed that the next time they met in that same room, she wouldn't be the one trembling. Amina knew that confronting Kofi would be useless. He was too powerful, too surrounded by people who protected him. If she accused him without proof, they would call her emotional, unstable, maybe even jealous. So she made a decision that would change everything: she would collect the truth herself. From that night on, Amina became a quiet observer in her own home. She smiled in public, played the perfect wife at events, and nodded politely at Kofi's speeches. But behind that calm smile, she was watching, listening, and recording. It started with a small voice recorder hidden in her handbag. During meetings at their mansion, she would sit silently, pretending to be uninterested, while her device captured every word. She heard them talk about deals that never made it to the news, money exchanged under the table, promises made to businessmen, and fake charity projects that used her name. One day, she found documents in Kofi's drawer, files that showed huge donations to her foundation that never actually reached the schools or hospitals they were meant for. Instead, the money went straight into secret accounts. Her name had been used to hide their corruption. The realization hit her like a slap. They had not only betrayed her as a wife but used her reputation to steal from the very people she wanted to help. She started gathering everything she could. She took photos of documents with her phone when no one was around, saved email attachments, and recorded phone calls when Kofi spoke carelessly in front of her. Sometimes, she'd sit across from him at dinner, pretending to listen as he discussed politics, while in her pocket the recorder blinked silently. Every night, she backed up her files and labeled them carefully: meeting 1, charity funds, phone call with minister. It became her secret mission, one that gave her strength when the loneliness felt too heavy. The more she uncovered, the deeper the rot appeared. It wasn't just about politics anymore, it was about greed, lies, and betrayal at every level. She heard Kofi talking about fake charity events where he pretended to donate food and school supplies that never existed. She discovered bribes disguised as gifts from foreign investors. The same people who praised her in interviews were stealing from the poor behind closed doors. Each recording made her heart ache, but it also made her stronger. She wasn't just collecting evidence anymore, she was reclaiming her power. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of control. She knew the truth, and she had proof. Amina realized that she didn't need to shout or fight, she just needed to wait for the right moment. She kept her secret well. Nobody suspected the quiet wife with the soft smile was building a storm. And when the time came, she promised herself, that storm would expose everything, every lie, every crime, every person who thought she was too weak to fight back. The election night was everything Kofi had dreamed of. The mansion was glowing with golden lights, guests in designer suits filled the ballroom, and the air buzzed with victory. Music played, glasses clinked, and the crowd chanted his name. Kofi Nkrumah, the new face of Ghana's politics, had won by a landslide. Amina stood beside him, dressed in a stunning gold gown, her smile calm and perfect. No one could guess that under that graceful smile, her heart was beating fast, not from pride, but from what she was about to do. As the night went on, Kofi gave his victory speech, thanking his team, his supporters, and of course, his loving wife. He held her hand up for the cameras, the crowd cheering louder. Amina smiled again, but this time, her eyes carried a quiet fire. When the applause faded, she gently took the microphone from him. "My husband always says that honesty wins hearts," she began softly. The crowd leaned in, expecting a sweet speech. "Let's test that theory tonight." The music stopped. The cameras turned toward her. In that moment, Amina connected her phone to the big screen behind them. A familiar voice filled the hall, Kofi's. At first, the guests thought it was another campaign video. But within seconds, the truth unfolded. The recording played his voice discussing bribes, fake charity donations, and plans to quietly separate from her after the election. Gasps echoed across the room. Kofi's smile disappeared as he rushed toward her, but she held up her hand, stopping him. "Wait," she said calmly. "There's more." Another clip began, Kofi laughing with his campaign advisor, the woman everyone thought was just a colleague. The recording revealed their affair in his own words. The audience went silent, their shock almost visible. Journalists dropped their glasses. The cameras kept rolling, broadcasting every word live. Kofi's face turned pale. His advisors froze in disbelief, whispering frantically to each other. The perfect image he had built was collapsing in front of everyone. "You wanted power," Amina said, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly. "But power means nothing without truth." Then she placed the microphone down, turned, and walked off the stage. The room erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions, guests tried to leave quietly, and Kofi stood frozen, staring at the screen that showed his downfall. Outside the ballroom, Amina took a deep breath. For the first time in years, she felt free. The flashing cameras behind her no longer frightened her, they fueled her. The truth was finally out. By the next morning, every news channel across Africa was replaying the video. Headlines read, "The First Lady Who Exposed Her Husband." The world now saw her not as a trophy wife, but as a woman who dared to tell the truth, no matter the cost. The days after Amina's shocking revelation felt like an earthquake that wouldn't stop. The media went wild. Every news station, blog, and radio talk show across Africa had only one story: the fall of Kofi Nkrumah. The man once celebrated as a national hero was now being called a liar, a thief, and a fraud. His smiling campaign posters were torn down, his allies vanished, and those who once praised him suddenly turned their backs. The very people who used to call him the future of Ghana now demanded his arrest. The empire he built on lies began to collapse faster than anyone could have imagined. Kofi tried to fight back. He called emergency press conferences, denying everything and claiming the recordings were fake. But the evidence Amina had collected was too strong, too detailed, too real. The voices on those tapes were unmistakable, his advisors, his ministers. Bank documents surfaced, and witnesses started coming forward. The country that once adored him now watched in anger and disbelief. Each new headline felt like another crack in the wall of his power. While Kofi hid from reporters, Amina did the opposite. She walked straight into the chaos with her head held high. When journalists surrounded her, she didn't shout or cry. She simply said, "The truth doesn't need to hide." That one line spread like wildfire. Overnight, she became more than a woman who exposed her husband, she became a symbol of courage. Women across Africa started sharing her story, calling her the voice of truth. Soon, the investigations began. Amina was asked to testify in court, and she agreed without hesitation. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and Kofi sat at the defense table, his once perfect suit wrinkled and his eyes downcast. Amina walked in wearing a simple white dress, calm and graceful. She took her seat and spoke clearly, describing everything she had seen, the fake charities, the bribes, the lies. There was no anger in her voice, just steady truth. Her words echoed through the room, and even the judges seemed moved. Kofi couldn't look at her. The man who once commanded crowds now sat in silence as the woman he underestimated revealed the truth piece by piece. When she finished, the courtroom was completely still. No one could deny what she had done. She had stood up to power without fear. Outside, crowds gathered, cheering her name. For the first time, she wasn't seen as Kofi's wife. She was Amina Mbil, the woman who brought down corruption with nothing but courage and truth. And as the police led Kofi away in handcuffs, Amina didn't smile in victory. She just looked up at the sky, calm and unbroken. Her battle was never about revenge, it was about justice. And in that moment, she knew she had finally won. Months passed after Kofi's downfall, and the storm finally began to calm. But Amina didn't disappear into silence like many expected. Instead, she rose stronger than ever. With the same grace that once charmed the public, she began building something new, a foundation called the Voice of Women in Power. Her goal was simple, to help women find strength in their own voices, no matter their background or situation. She traveled across Africa, meeting young girls, widows, and women in politics, reminding them that power doesn't come from titles or fame, it comes from truth and courage. Her story spread like wildfire. News channels called her the woman who turned betrayal into a revolution. Social media was filled with clips of her speeches, where she spoke with calm passion, her words cutting through hearts. "You can break my heart," she once said in an interview, "but you cannot break my voice." Those words inspired millions. Amina became more than a public figure, she became a movement. She used her pain to open doors for others, proving that no one could silence a woman who stood for justice. When a journalist asked her one day if she regretted marrying Kofi, she smiled gently and replied, "No. I just wish he knew I was never his campaign prop. I was the whole story." That answer went viral overnight. From a woman once treated as decoration, Amina had become a symbol of dignity, truth, and strength. Her journey showed the world that even in the face of betrayal, a woman could rise, not as a victim, but as a force of change. And for the first time, Amina wasn't standing beside power. She was power.